In 53 BC, 20,000 Roman soldiers marched into the Syrian desert, armored in iron and fueled by pride. They believed they were on the verge of an easy conquest, another triumph for Rome's endless list of victories. Yet, only a handful ever returned. What they faced beyond the Euphrates was not a familiar enemy, not a familiar battlefield, and not a familiar war. For the first time in generations, Roman steel met a force that did not bend, did not break, and did not play by the rules Rome had written. This is the story of that encounter, the moment Rome discovered its destiny had limits, that its legions could bleed, and that another empire could stand in its way. This is the story of Rome's worst nightmare. Marcus Licinius Crassus was the richest man Rome had ever produced. His wealth was legendary estates, silver mines, slave markets, shipping fleets, and land stretching across continents. But none of it was enough. Wealth was not power. Wealth was not glory. Rome was built on triumphs, on victories, on generals who carved their names into eternity. Julius Caesar conquered Gaul and won the adoration of the masses. Pompey the Great crushed Rome's enemies and returned a hero. Crassus was tired of being the third name in Rome's greatest trio. He wanted a war, and so he sought command of an army. His plan was bold, reckless, and fueled entirely by pride. March east, cross into a land Rome barely understood, and conquer a rising empire no Roman army had ever faced. He promised the Senate a swift victory and endless treasure. He gathered 7 legions, 40,000 men, and marched toward the east. The Roman legions had defeated every great rival in the Mediterranean world. They had shattered kingdoms, toppled Carthage, and subdued nations from Spain to Syria. Their discipline was legend. Their confidence was certainty. Rome believed its armies were unstoppable. Over centuries of victories, that belief hardened into arrogance. Even Crassus embraced the illusion that no Eastern army could resist Rome. He imagined a campaign that would mirror Caesar's conquest of Gaul. Glory seemed guaranteed. No one questioned it. But as the legions crossed into Mesopotamia, they found themselves marching into a vast barren land under a scorching sun. Their armor burned against their skin. Their shields weighed heavily on their shoulders. Their formation stretched endlessly across a hostile wilderness. There were no walls to besiege, no infantry to confront, no settlements to occupy. Only silence. Empty horizon, and the uneasy feeling of being watched. Their scouts reported nothing. Their commanders pressed forward anyway. They believed the enemy was running, but the enemy had not fled. The Parthians were waiting. The thunder of hooves broke the silence. Dust rose from the horizon like a storm. The enemy appeared, thousands of mounted archers racing across the desert, moving too quickly for infantry to track. Their armor glimmered, their horses thundered, and their formation twisted like a serpent in the sand. They struck without warning, unleashing volleys of arrows from extreme distance. Roman shields lifted, Roman formations tightened, Roman officers barked orders. Yet every time the Romans advanced, the Parthians withdrew, only to attack again from afar. Their strategy was relentless attack, retreat, regroup, return, circle, fire. The Parthians refused close combat. They refused to be pinned down. They refused to fight Rome's way. Hours passed, then a day, then another. The Romans struggled across the open desert, unable to catch an enemy that was always just beyond reach. They did not realize they had been lured into a trap. The desert was the battlefield, carefully chosen, perfectly suited for speed, mobility, and exhaustion. As Roman morale faltered, the Parthians began showcasing a maneuver the world would never forget. Their mounted archers would gallop away from the advancing Romans, then twist at the waist, spin in the saddle without slowing, and fire backward accurately while retreating at full speed. This maneuver would become legendary. It would later be known as the Parthian shot. No one else in the ancient world could perform it with such precision, such coordination, and such devastating impact. Roman shields could not withstand the endless rain of arrows. The heavy legionary armor, designed for short, brutal infantry combat, became a prison in the desert heat. The Romans had marched into a furnace weighed down by metal, unable to reach the enemy, dying where they stood. Their javelins fell short. Their cavalry was shredded instantly. Parthian arrows pierced flesh through armor, cut deep through shields, and severed resolve. Soon, Roman formations began to break apart. The desert floor became a graveyard of shattered shields, broken spears, and bodies collapsing under the relentless heat. Panic spread. Soldiers begged Crassus to retreat, to find water, to escape. But Crassus still believed he could turn the battle, still imagined glory waiting just beyond the next clash. He ordered the legions to hold their position. They obeyed. And they died standing still. At Carrhae, Rome's pride was shattered. 3/4 of the army perished. 10,000 were taken prisoner. The legions that survived fled in terror. Crassus himself attempted to negotiate for peace. He never returned. Ancient accounts claim he was executed and that molten gold was poured down his throat as a punishment for his greed. The story may be legend, but the symbolism was unmistakable. Crassus had been devoured by the one thing he desired most. Rome had finally met an enemy capable of defeating it. In the aftermath, shock swept through the Roman world. The defeat at Carrhae was not just a military failure, it was a revelation. The Romans had discovered a force their legions could not overcome. Parthia mastered everything Rome was not prepared for: mobility, flexibility, and strategic patience. The Parthian army did not rely on massive infantry formations. It relied on speed and distance. Their cavalry could fire devastating arrows while riding at full speed, then vanish across the sand. Their cataphracts, armored cavalry warriors encased in steel, served as the hammer to destroy weakened infantry lines after the archers softened them. Rome's strength was close combat. Parthia's strength was to make sure close combat never happened, and when Rome attempted to retaliate, disaster struck again. In 36 BC, Mark Antony marched east with another massive army to restore Roman honor. He failed just as miserably. His forces were outmaneuvered, cut off from supply lines, harassed, and dismantled piece by piece, until he was forced to retreat, humiliated and defeated. The wars continued for nearly 3 centuries. Rome and Parthia clashed over Armenia, Syria, and the vital trade routes linking east and west. Yet neither side ever conquered the other. Rome burned Parthian cities. Parthia captured Roman eagles. Rome seized capitals. Parthia destroyed entire armies. And always, after years of bloodshed, the frontier remained where it had begun. Rome's empire reached its peak, expanding across 3 continents. Yet in the east stood a border it could not cross. In the east, there remained an equal. Parthia was far more than a military opponent. They were the guardians of the Silk Road, the single most important commercial artery of the ancient world. Through their lands flowed Chinese silk, Indian spices, Persian horses, and countless luxuries demanded by the elite of Rome. Every caravan paid Parthian taxes. Every merchant submitted to Parthian control. Gold flooded into their coffers, fueling their armies, their politics, and their endurance. Rome could not break the Parthian economy. They could only envy it and secretly fear it. After Carrhae, Rome changed. The legions began incorporating new tactics, new weapons, and new cavalry units. They studied desert warfare. They adjusted supply strategies. They trained for speed instead of rigidity. The defeat at Carrhae wounded Rome psychologically more deeply than any other loss. It proved the unthinkable. Rome was not invincible. Rome's methods were not universal. Rome's pride did not guarantee victory. Parthia eventually fell, but not to Rome. A new Persian dynasty, the Sassanids, conquered them and inherited their struggle against the legions. Yet the legacy of Parthia endured. They were the empire that stopped Rome, the empire Rome could not conquer. The empire whose tactics reshaped Roman doctrine. And the empire that exposed the limits of the greatest military machine the ancient world had ever known. For centuries afterward, whenever Rome prepared for war in the east, commanders whispered the same warning, the same memory that refused to fade. Remember Carrhae. Remember the desert. Remember the horse archers. Remember the Parthian shot. Remember the humiliation. Because among all Rome's enemies, Carthage, Macedon, Dacia, Germania, there was only one foe Rome never figured out, one rival Rome could not break, one power Rome could not subdue. Parthia did not need to conquer Rome, it only needed to survive Rome, and it succeeded. The Parthian Empire changed Rome forever, and ensured the world would never forget the day the legions fell. And yet, there remains one Parthian tactic Rome never solved. One method Rome could never counter. One secret that haunted the empire for generations, and that story is just beginning. Thanks for watching, and if you enjoyed this journey into history, be sure to subscribe for more.